Experimental design is an exercise in resource management. Researchers must constantly balance the drive for statistical discovery against rationed budgets, time, and participant pools. In a standard parallel design, researchers must recruit two completely distinct participant groups to test two different conditions. One group gets the treatment, the other gets the control. The crossover model offers an appealing alternative. By routing a single group sequentially through both conditions, the participant acts as their own control, eliminating between-subject variance. Because of this, researchers assume they can cut sample size in half without sacrificing statistical power. While this mathematical shortcut is seductive to a resource-strapped scientist, its efficacy relies entirely on the assumption of a frictionless temporal transition. The high statistical power of the crossover model is not a permanent guarantee. It is a fragile state dependent on specific temporal conditions. The design requires absolute independence between periods. The psychological or physiological effects of the first condition must completely dissipate before the second condition begins. A 10-year review of behavioral science literature reveals a systemic flaw in how this design is applied. Researchers consistently mismanage this vital temporal transition. This temporal mismanagement introduces uncontrolled systemic variance, which works against the exact statistical power the design was chosen to protect. Defaulting to a crossover structure in behavioral science without strict empirical calibration of time is a statistically dangerous practice. As we delve into the mechanics of this failure, the primary threat to a within-subject experiment is known as the carryover effect. This chart tracks a crossover timeline. Carryover occurs when the lingering influence of the first treatment bleeds into the second period. Initiating the second period prematurely causes additive confounding. The second measurement is skewed, sitting atop residual noise from treatment 1. The standard methodological defense against this additive bleedover is implementing a scheduled washout period. A washout period is a mandatory, calculated pause in the experiment. Its exclusive purpose is to let the participant return to a neutral baseline before introducing the next variable. In pharmacology, washout periods are calculated with hard precision using exact pharmacokinetic half-lives. A drug leaves the system at a known rate. In behavioral science, however, that precision completely disappears. Subjective variables like emotional arousal or cognitive priming lack measurable physiological decay rates. Because we cannot measure exactly when these states dissipate, behavioral washout periods are inherently speculative. The consequences of this guesswork are visible in a 10-year meta-analysis of peer-reviewed behavioral crossover studies published between 2010 and 2020. The review highlights extreme variance in how researchers apply washout durations. The timelines documented span a range from a mere 60 seconds to over 33 days. This scatter plot maps reviewed studies, washout duration on the x-axis against effect size on the y-axis. An overlaid Gaussian curve shifts and warps to match the heavily skewed data. This distribution explicitly failed the Shapiro-Wilk normality test, with a p-value under 0.05. The consequence of this non-normality is severe. Utilizing standard parametric tests, like a typical t-test, on skewed data degrades comparative statistical power. Instead of parametric defaults, researchers should have mandated robust, non-parametric alternatives, such as the Wilcoxon Signed-Rank test. By combining arbitrary timing guesses with inappropriate parametric defaults, researchers compromised the exact mathematical efficacy they initially sought to gain. We can shift from the theoretical risk of arbitrary timing to the measurable, quantifiable damage it inflicts on a study's final results. This extreme variance is a systemic error, actively generated by the methodology. A Kruskal-Wallis test confirms a significant difference in effect sizes tied directly to washout duration. The arbitrary length exerts a measurable distortion, represented by an eta squared value of 0.201. While an eta squared of 0.201 is technically classified as a small effect size, it represents a significant, uncontrolled variable altering the study's outcome. Setting a washout duration forces researchers into a tight corner. Setting it too short guarantees carryover bias from the previous treatment will taint the data, but the inverse risk is equally damaging. Setting the washout period too long introduces period effects, where the participants' baseline traits naturally evolve or decay over time. Extended timelines also carry a severe practical burden. Dragging out a study increases participant dropout rates, which ultimately shrinks the very sample size the design was trying to preserve. The washout period is a mechanism intended to protect the study's power, yet when uncalibrated, it actively generates the variance that destroys it. A logical counterargument raised by many researchers is straightforward. If carryover is a risk, why not simply test the collected data to see if a carryover effect is present? To test for carryover, you have to run a separate between-subjects analysis comparing the two distinct time periods. This approach contains a fatal mathematical flaw. Between-subjects tests are inherently underpowered compared to the main within-subjects design of the study. This creates a statistical catch-22. To accurately detect a subtle carryover effect using an underpowered test, researchers are forced to artificially inflate their nominal alpha. This increases the false positive rate, which compromises the integrity of the entire experiment. Relying on post-hoc statistical tests to identify carryover is a mathematically inadequate safety net for a flawed design choice. To harness the theoretical power of a crossover design, all inappropriate variability must be completely removed. Unless a researcher is utilizing a highly replicated behavioral manipulation with a previously proven precise baseline return time, guessing the washout period is unacceptable. Without precise knowledge of a psychological variable's temporal decay, the perceived efficiency of a crossover study is mathematically unsupported. Given the extreme fragility of the crossover's temporal assumptions and the risk of non-normal data distributions, researchers must reevaluate their defaults. Modern behavioral researchers are mathematically safer investing resources into a well-powered parallel study than risking the uncalibrated fragility of a crossover design.